Is here along with Linda Burney from the opposition. Michael Sukkar, why this change of heart on a measure like this?
Well, Hamish, obviously these are extraordinary circumstances and this is an extraordinary response. As some of the other panellists have said, this has been a very calibrated and methodical approach. At first instance, when it became clear that the economy, as a result of the health crisis, was going to suffer, we really focused on strengthening the safety net. Once it became clear that unemployment was going to rise, we felt that strengthening that safety net was the first most important step, which we did. We also put in place instant support for small and medium enterprises to try and help them to the greatest extent possible, hold on to as many of those employees as possible, to mean that they didn't need to access those.
Sure, but with respect on that very point, many employers did actually get rid of staff because they didn't think something like this measure was on the way. Do you accept that?
Well, Hamish, this has deteriorated very quickly. I think everybody accepts it's moved very quickly, it's evolved, and it has deteriorated. And as we have shown, we are able and we are willing to be agile and to deal with each problem as it comes. And I think the word extraordinary and unprecedented has been used for this package because we obviously are faced with extraordinary and unprecedented times. That has been the modus operandi of the government, but strengthening that safety net at the beginning was the key focus, and since then it's been about how do we keep people connected to their employment, because we know it's not just an economic issue, it's a societal, a mental health, and in the end will enable Australia, I think, at the end of this, to be in a position to take advantage, hopefully, of an improving economy once the health crisis ends.
I'm just trying to establish, though, whether you acknowledge that some businesses would have laid off staff in recent weeks because the government was saying that there wouldn't be something like what had been rolled out in the UK.
Well, really importantly, today's announcement, Hamish, allows for employees that were connected with their employer on the 1st of March, so some weeks ago, to be able to be a part of this scheme. So if you have been an employee who has been stepped down or lost your job, you will be able to re-engage with your employer as a part of the JobKeeper allowance. So it's a recognition from us. This has moved very quickly. We've got to be pretty novel in how we've approached it, and that's exactly what we've done.
Linda Burney, were you surprised at this turnaround?
Hello panel, hello Hamish, and hello Michael, and yes, I do have my hand sanitiser. This was a surprise and a welcome surprise. I think, as Jennifer said just last week, the government was ridiculing the idea of a wage subsidy to keep people connected to their employer. The Labor Party has been constructive and worked with the government and supported the government throughout this crisis, and it is a crisis. I talked to some people on Centrelink lines on Monday. They were terrified, they were scared, and they were stressed. And we must always remember that people are at the heart of this. This $130 billion announcement today is very welcome, and the Labor Party does welcome it. There are some groups that are gapingly going to miss out, and I'm sure we'll come to that. But when you have a look at this package today, it is about keeping people connected to their employer. We know that it is also very welcome that it's going to cover casuals, but the bar that's been set is that if you're a casual, you need to be with that employer for 12 months, and the employer must demonstrate that 30% of their revenue has been lost because of coronavirus, and they are the measures that need to be understood.
On that very point, Linda Burney, we've got a series of very practical questions, Michael Sukkar, about these payments. From Jen Axford, she wants to know how this is applied to casual workers who work for multiple employers.
Well, you nominate one employer, so for a casual that's got multiple employers, you nominate one, and provided that employer nominates you as well, then that is your primary employer for the purposes of the JobKeeper payment. And you obviously receive one payment of $1,500 a fortnight.
And will this apply, this is a question essentially about uni students, will this apply to casual employees who've received ongoing, regular and systematic rostered hours, but over a prolonged period?
Well, the rules are quite clear as stated in today's announcement, which means you've got to have been employed for 12 months by that employer as of the 1st of March. That is the broad test that we're putting in place for casual employees. And I think it's important to note here, and I'm sure Linda would acknowledge this, you know, a few days ago the argument was about extending this to part-time employees. I don't think anyone expected the government would extend it as far as casuals. We thought that was very important to do because obviously they need to stay to the greatest extent possible connected to their employers as well. So we've been really expansive in how we have taken the JobKeeper payment forward, and that has obviously extended in a broad way to casuals too.
OK, on contractors, Sean Ryan's written in, he's an Uber driver, he says we're considered contractors. In terms of the $1,500 per fortnight JobKeeper payment, does he approach the government for that himself, or does he have to get Uber to register and declare him viable for that?
Well, look, it depends on your employment relationship. But if you are and the question came up a bit earlier about self-employed individuals or sole traders, if you were operating as a sole trader, self-employed, and you've got an ABN, you can apply yourself. And if you go to ato.gov.au, you can register an intention to apply, even as a sole trader or someone who's self-employed, for the JobKeeper payment. Before I walked into the studio, Hamish, we'd had 65,000 businesses who'd already registered for the JobKeeper payment. So that does extend to self-employed individuals as well.
Linda Burney, what are you hearing from constituents about how confused they are, the challenges in terms of actually trying to navigate this?
There have been numerous calls by people that are confused. Why the government decided to change the name of New Start to Job Seeker last week was a bit mysterious. But you've got the Job Seeker payment, the JobKeeper payment, and then the $750 stimulus payments that you've spoken to. And people are confused about whether they've registered, if they've registered with Centrelink with an intent to claim the Job Seeker payment, what does it mean in terms of if they are eligible or their companies or their employer is eligible for the JobKeeper payment? They're the sorts of very confused messages that we're getting, apart from the many calls that we're getting from people that are trapped overseas. OK. Well,
we know many businesses are struggling. I've been to meet one pub manager who is doing it tough.
Hi, I'm Yana. I'm 23. I've worked at the Cricketers Arms for close to 5 years, and up until a week ago, I was employed full-time. Now I'm unemployed and waiting to get on Centrelink. When we noticed it was getting quieter, the prospect of having to shut down became realer. We felt that it was better to stop now, and we'd have a better chance at reopening in a few months if we did stop. We let go close to 15 people, kitchen and bar staff, security, DJs, bands, people that have worked here for years. It's heartbreaking. This place is normally heaving on a Friday and Saturday night. It's so sad to see it empty. We have probably over 50 kegs of beer, 100 cases of beer in the cellar.
What's the value of that?
I would say close to $30,000.
When you look at that sort of stockpile there in the cellar, what do you think? What goes through your mind?
It's really sad. It's a huge waste, not knowing what to do with it.
How far does the Centrelink payment go for you?
I don't know how far it will go for me. It'll just cover my rent and groceries for the week, but it's not going to cover any bills. I have a little bit of savings behind me, but if I'm waiting till mid to late April for that payment, that'll definitely burn through to cover rent and bills in that time. I feel uncertain because there's no time frame on this. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know how long I'll be in this predicament for. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but what's it going to look like when we come out on the other end? I don't know when things are going to be normal again.
Are you scared?
I am, but it hasn't hit me yet. It doesn't feel real.
Well, Michael Sukkar, what does Jana do? What do her staff do? Do they withdraw their application to Centrelink now and then try and get this JobKeeper allowance instead?
Well, it's very sobering to hear Jana's story, and I think so many of us, and even on shows like this, focus on the very macro picture, but there are real people and real lives and real anxieties behind it. The arrangements that will be in place, obviously, if an employer is going to be nominating employees for the JobKeeper payment, which is a higher payment than the job seeker payment, I wouldn't encourage anybody to withdraw an application. The ATO, Services Australia, where there are applications for both, will obviously work out administrative arrangements to ensure that those individuals get the JobKeeper payment. So I would caution them not to withdraw an application at this point in time. But obviously, for Jana and all of the employees at the Cricketers Arms, the JobKeeper payment will be available to them, and at $1,500 a fortnight is obviously higher than the job seeker payment, and we haven't mentioned the coronavirus supplement of $550 a fortnight. So that will be available to them.
So just to be clear, you're saying people should keep in multiple applications, both for the job seeker and the JobKeeper?
I wouldn't encourage anybody to withdraw an application at the moment, because we've got a registration process now for employers who will register employees. As and when that is processed and there are an individual who is prima facie entitled to both payments, administrative arrangements will be put in place to make sure that they get the JobKeeper payment, and at that point in time all of the other applications will be removed.
So the government will preference somebody getting the JobKeeper payment over the job seeker one?
Well, no, that if you are applying for JobKeeper, if your employer's nominating you for JobKeeper, that is the payment that you will receive. If you want the job seeker payment and not the JobKeeper payment, of course you're entitled to do that too, but you will receive one payment and you'll have to fulfil the criteria of that. But you asked my advice at the beginning, Hamish, of whether they should withdraw their application for the job seeker payment. I wouldn't suggest they do that, and there will be administrative arrangements that, as I'm sure as you would appreciate, need to be put in place between now and this being legislated to make that as smooth as possible for everybody.
Linda Burney, I can see you shaking your head at that explanation.
Well, the story of Jana, I agree with Michael, is a very sobering one. But what she really told us, Hamish, is that no one knows how long this is going to go on, that there's going to be a major social reset after this across the world. And she's also saying that she doesn't feel like it's real. And they're feelings that I think so many people are experiencing. I agree that if Jana has registered for Centrelink for the old New Start payment, the job seeker payment, she should keep that registration in. But she would be eligible for the JobKeeper payment, the one that was announced today by Scott Morrison. But the other point that I think we need to take out of Jana's story, it is one of millions of stories across this country, and the rate of unemployment, which I'm sure people will comment on, is going to be something like 11 to 12%. Now, we have been here before, and that was the Great Depression, of course, and during the financial crisis. And as Scott Morrison likes to say, when we get to the other side, well, I think what Jana's asking is, what is the other side?
All right, our next two questions are from Sharon Curry in Maruya and Susan Thomas in Carlton, Victoria.
My question to the panel is, I'm a hairdresser and I really don't see this industry as an essential service. Hairdressing salons are allowed to continue operating. This is very confusing to me, seeing as how I know the advice we are continually hearing is no physical touching and keep it a safe distance away from other people. This is an impossibility in this industry. I feel we are putting ourselves and our families at risk. If we decide to self-isolate, then will we be entitled to the new job seeker payment?
I'm finding the government is giving mixed messages around coronavirus. I'm currently physically isolating myself from my grandchildren because I'm 63 years old and I'm following the government's advice. I'm also an early childhood educator where I work on the floor directly with children and my colleagues in a long day care centre. Now, and I'm allowed to work. Now, I know I could choose not to work, but I'm a single woman on a low income, living in social housing, living pay to pay. How do I pay my rent, my food and my bills if I don't work?
Linda Burney, this speaks to a lot of the questions that we've had where people find themselves in predicaments that they just can't seem to find their way out of right now. What do they do?
Well, I think what we saw there was one of the concerns that many people have, and that is confusion about mixed messages. I mean, you've got the federal government saying one thing, you've got the state governments saying another thing, and I think local government should have more of a say about what happens at the local level.
But should people be obliged to work if they know that they're at risk by doing it?
I think the important thing is that which we're all doing, is follow directions, particularly the health directions, as much as is possible, which both the women that just spoke then are doing. They have made wise decisions, but the government needs to understand, and so does business, to understand that those wise decisions throw up incredibly complex circumstances, which we've just heard. And the most important thing that people want is they want clear, concise, honest messaging with accountability.
Michael Sukkar, can you understand why someone like Susan is confused? She's told to go to work and be amongst children, but then when she's at home, she shouldn't be with her grandchildren because she's at risk.
Well, Hamish, obviously all of these decisions have come out of an unprecedented national cabinet. Some people refer to it as a bit of a wartime cabinet, which has brought together the Prime Minister and every state premier and territory chief minister. And it's a body of consensus, and it brings to the table the best health advice. I know, for example, in my home state of Victoria, that protocols are certainly put in place for those people deemed to be in a higher risk category, either because of their age or comorbidities. But I think, you know, again, to talk about that there's no rule book here. This is
but
very...
with respect, can you see why someone like that is confused right now?
I can understand, Hamish, why this being a very quickly evolving process where we've had relatively light touch approach now to quite a heavy-handed approach of people essentially being asked to stay at home, having moved so quickly. Of course I can understand, Hamish, that confusion. What I'm saying is this is an imperfect situation we find ourselves in. I know that the Prime Minister and the Premiers and the Chief Ministers and all of their health advisors are doing their level best to try and manage the health objectives, but also to go back to the question earlier in the show, not to be cavalier about decisions that would destroy somebody's livelihood or destroy their business. As Jana pointed out, the real-life example of how it impacts people, trying to manage those two things has meant, in conjunction with it being a quickly evolving system, that yes, of course there is some confusion, but we have worked day and night, I can assure you, to try and get the message out to people, what the expectations of the National Cabinet is, how they can mitigate the risk for themselves and their families and their loved ones. We've got to keep working on it. We will, and we'll keep trying our hardest.
OK, one question now from Damien Jelly in Bondi Junction, New South Wales.
Hi Q&A, my name's Damien Chalet from the Literature Gardens Music Festival. I'm a music promoter and my question is to Michael Sukkar, the Assistant Treasurer. Your stimulus package is for employers to keep on employees, but all my workers are contractors. My full-time workers are contractors, my part-time workers are contractors. There's 700 contractors before a large event. Music promoters are cancelling events left, right and centre, having to hand out refunds. There's no stimulus package and there's a cash crisis. There's been a better reaction around the world for this from other governments. What is your government going to do in this crisis?
So can he do anything to keep those workers on under the new arrangements?
Well, again, Hamish, it really depends on the relationship, and what we are doing is trying to maintain that employment relationship between employers and employees. But as I said earlier, for those who are self-employed or sole traders, which sounds as some of his contractors would fall into that boat, that they will also be entitled to apply for the JobKeeper payment. And I know that Paul Fletcher, the Communications Minister, is sitting down with the industry and looking at ways that we can assist because...
But so they would apply as individual sole traders. They wouldn't be able to do something in connection with this individual who they're working with and have been working with over a long period of time.
Yeah, correct. As announced today, Hamish, they would do that in their own right. But as I think has been highlighted, our first package, 17 billion, our second package, 66, today, 130 billion. We are keen to do whatever we can to assist affected industries, and I know the Communications Minister's engaging on this. This is not the end of the story. This will evolve. Our response will keep evolving, and that's the assurance that I can provide as far as the arts industry goes.
Michael Sukkar, Linda Burney, thank you very much for being with us. I want to turn this to